enough, we need to go to $2,000. I didn't say he was a visionary. He's right on this issue.
You know, obviously Speaker Pelosi, Senator Chuck Schumer, the Treasury Secretary debated this with Republican leadership for a long time. They cut a deal for the $600 stimulus check. Did they just waste their time and cut a lousy deal?
Well, look, when you look at a deal, you have to look at it within the context of the problems that we face. And Brett, as I think most Americans know, we are living in a terrible, unprecedented moment when millions of folks have lost their jobs and their income. Tens of millions of people are facing eviction. We are looking at a record level of hunger in America.
Awesome news. There is a new push for Congress to renew the expanded child tax credit this year. It's because Joe Biden is now meeting with lawmakers just to discuss new relief bills, and now millions of people soon are eligible for a $2,000 check in extra stimulus money. Right now, we know that millions of families received the monthly child tax credits already that was worth up to $300 per child in 2021. And thanks to this credit, according to a new report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the legislation that put more generous payments in place has already expired. What this means is that about 19 million people are losing more than half of the full credit at all. Making the full $2,000 child tax credit available to children whose parents' earnings are just too low or who are out of work would help substantially reduce child poverty. The expanded child tax credit and other legislative changes help reduce the child poverty rate to a record low of 5.2%. Without those changes, it would be at least 8.1%. Now, during this lame duck session before the next Congress is seated, the legislators have already another opportunity just to expand the credit again. At the same time, they are poised to consider corporate tax breaks, and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities already recently stated that the stakes are high. Policy lawmakers can expand the child tax credit, or they can fail to act and see the rescue plan's historic gains against child poverty evaporate. The 2021 child tax credit already gave families larger sums of up to $3,600 per child under 6, and up to $3,000 per child 6 to 17. But folks, not only that, but more families were already eligible to receive the expanded credit. That's because it was given to people that were eligible to high-income families and also included a 17-year-old dependent. But now this child tax credit has reverted to previous rules for a total of $2,000 per child under age 17. Now, because those rules also include earned income requirements, about 20 million people receive less than the full credit. Earlier this month, Democratic members of Congress already sent a letter to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. They just urged them to consider and reinstate this child tax credit again, as well as the expanded earned income tax credit by no later than the end of the year. The lawmakers wrote, "We should not extend the corporate tax breaks unless we deliver additional relief for families." Now, as President Biden plans to use some time over the holidays to decide whether he wants to run for re-election as he assesses his political future, while giving himself a deadline for a year next year, is that Biden, who just turned 80, remains in many Democratic minds as the party's best shot of returning back to the White House. Still, he's weighing his next steps at a time when several contemporaries in the party have stepped down, like Pelosi. For Biden, coming off a stronger than expected midterm result for Democrats is sure to factor in the decision. And while the House has already interested and insisted for months that Biden's plan to run again, the president has already left the door open that he may make a final decision after discussing this with his family. But we all know an early 2023 announcement for Joe Biden, which is aligned with new faces and would take on different positions in the Democratic leadership. Nancy Pelosi is now not running again, neither is Steny Hoyer. And it's clearing the way for younger Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar to hold the party's efforts in the new House minority. The favorite in the running is to become the next House Democratic leader. Now, at 52 years old, his name is Hakeem Jeffries. He's substantially younger than the current leadership. But do you think he will become the president of the United States? We're not sure about that. But tell me what you think in the comments down below. We have a ton of news about the fourth stimulus check, Social Security benefits, SSI, and SSDI. Here's the most important information, folks, that I want you to know. Stay tuned because we got a ton of news to cover. Now, according to the Department of Revenue, Massachusetts has already returned at least $2 billion in excess money. This is excess revenue to taxpayers. It comes with more checks and direct deposits than ever. Approximately 2.4 million taxpayers had already received the funds as of late. A spokesperson even told reporters this week that the majority, 1.5 million refunds, totaled around $1.4 billion, were made by paper checks.
It's impossible not to think of my family. Today, I'm wearing the tie I wore at my daughter's wedding, one of the happiest moments in my life. But I also cannot help but recall the harrowing conversation I had with her and her wife a little more than 2 years ago. In September of 2020, I was in the middle of a family dinner when we received the news that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away. I remember that awful feeling around the dinner table, and I distinctly remember the question my daughter and her wife asked: could our right to marry be undone? Millions of Americans in same-sex marriages go about their day with this terrible question lurking in the back of their minds. It's scary. It's a scary but necessary acknowledgement that despite all the progress we've made, the constitutional right to same-sex marriage is not even a decade old and exists only by the virtue of a very narrow 5-4 Supreme Court decision. And we all know the court has changed since that decision. As we have already seen in the past, as we have already seen this year, what the court has decided in the past can be easily taken away in the future. So today's vote is deeply personal for many of us in this chamber. It's personal for me, of course. It's personal to many of my colleagues and their staff and their families. And while we still have a few more votes to take, today is certainly an occasion for joy and relief. But as important as today is, let's remember nothing about this process was certain. Remember, Mr. President, remember, it was our original plan to act on the Respect for Marriage Act in September, shortly after the House voted to pass this bill over the summer, with a surprising 47 Republicans voting for the act. We knew this bill was popular. We knew it was the right thing to do. But what we did not know was whether or not we had enough support, 60 votes, to pass this bill through the Senate. Maybe the votes would materialize if we forced a vote on the floor, but that was highly unlikely. And for a great number of us, for so much of America, this bill was too important to risk failure. So back in September, when I met with the leaders of this bill in
The IRS has not come out and said exactly what they're going to do, but if we look at past relief payments going out, it's first going to go to those with direct deposits, then it's going to trickle down to those needing checks, and those will be sent out in later weeks.
Already be in your bank account.
$91.95, which is crazy.
It won't bring gas prices down, but it could bring your bank balance up.
Money that I didn't expect always makes a difference.
Billions in inflation relief payments will start showing up in California.
The move comes as the administration has been meeting with oil company executives to negotiate ways to lower fuel prices ahead of the elections. Partly driven by high energy prices will be a key issue. The administration is also considering another release that would be separate from the previously authorized one, though a decision hasn't been made on whether to do so or not. The Biden administration intends to announce plans to refill the reserve, and also details such as how the administration would pay for the oil and when it would buy were still being worked out in one-on-one meetings with industry representatives. Oil prices have actually shot higher last week after the oil producing cartel OPEC and its allied countries